The sound hits first, a bone-shattering crash that splits the quiet suburban morning in half. Through the security camera footage, we see it, a silver Mercedes punching through the garage door like cardboard, metal screaming, wood splintering. The car doesn't stop. It keeps going, deeper into the shadows of T. Marcus Webb had owned his house on Elm Street for 7 years. It was modest but meticulously maintained, a 1970s ranch with a newly installed 3-car garage, a driveway he'd had sealed the previous spring, and a mailbox his daughter had painted with sunflowers when she was 8. Everything about the house said quiet competence, a life in order. The garage door was less than 2 years old. Top of the line. He'd spent $4,000 on it because Emma, his ex-wife, had suggested that a newer garage would help with the resale value if he ever decided to move. He hadn't planned on moving. He liked it here. Marcus was in the kitchen, making a third cup of coffee and reviewing contract language on his laptop when he heard it. Not a crash, exactly. A sound bigger than that. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, the floor, the walls, the very foundation of the house. He jumped up, coffee sloshing across the granite countertop, and ran toward the garage. The door to the garage from the kitchen was already swinging open, blown inward by the percussion of impact. Dust hung in the air like a physical presence, disturbed by something massive moving through it. For a moment, Marcus couldn't process what he was seeing. A silver Mercedes-Benz sat in his garage. Not parked. Saturday. Its front bumper was still wedged in the twisted remains of the sectional garage door, metal and wood fragments scattered across his pristine concrete floor like confetti at a disaster. The windshield was intact, but the entire front end was wrapped around the support beam that held up the roof. Marcus felt his heart stop. He stood frozen in the doorway, his brain refusing to assemble this reality into something that made sense. The car shouldn't be here. There was no possibility in which this car was supposed to be here. The driver's side door opened. A woman in her mid-50s emerged, blonde hair swept into an immaculate ponytail, oversized sunglasses still perched on her face despite the fact that they were indoors now. She wore a white linen dress, the kind that costs more than it looks like it should, and white sneakers that looked like they'd never touched an actual surface. "Oh my God," she said, looking around the garage with wide eyes. "Oh my God, this is bad." Marcus found his voice somewhere in the back of his throat. What happened?" "Your mailbox," the woman said, pointing toward the driveway. "It's right where it shouldn't be." "I didn't see it. The sun was in my eyes. I was coming around the corner and then," she gestured vaguely at the car, as if it had materialized there through no action of her own. "You drove through my garage door," Marcus said slowly, testing the words to make sure they were real. "Well, technically, the garage door was in the way," the woman said, and then smiled. Actually smiled. It was a smile that suggested she'd made a joke, and she was waiting for him to laugh. Marcus didn't laugh. He stepped into the garage, his eyes moving from the car to the woman to the destruction and back again. "I need your insurance information," he said quietly. His voice sounded far away, even to himself. "Of course." The woman pulled her phone from a small white designer bag. "I'm calling my insurance company right now. But between you and me, you might want to check your driveway placement. Most people don't put their mailbox quite so close to." "The mailbox has been in the same spot for 7 years, Marcus interrupted. "It's not on the driveway. It's 4 feet into the property. Exactly where it should be." The woman's smile froze. "Well, I wasn't paying attention. I was coming around the corner and—" "You were speeding," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question. I was not speeding. I was coming to check on my daughter. She lives 2 houses down." The woman gestured toward the street. "I come this way all the time, and I've never had a problem. If you'd taken better care of your driveway, painted it so people could see the turn." "The driveway is standard asphalt," Marcus said, feeling something cold bloom in his chest. This woman was serious. She was actually serious. Your car is in my house. Technically, it's in your garage, the woman corrected. And I'm handling it. I'm calling my insurance. They'll take care of everything. She was already on the phone, speaking in rapid, clipped tones to someone on the other end. Marcus heard her name, Karen Mitchell, and her policy number, and the phrase, "the driver's insurance will handle it," repeated back to her in a tinny voice through the speaker. The tow truck arrived 40 minutes later. The police came too, at Marcus's insistence, though the officer who showed up took one look at the scene and seemed to understand immediately that this was going to be a drawn-out affair. The insurance company would need to be involved. There would be estimates and assessments and weeks of waiting. Karen stood on the driveway, arms crossed, still wearing her sunglasses even though the morning had turned gray and clouded. She watched the tow truck hook up her Mercedes with the expression of someone watching a slightly inconvenient scene in a television show. "This is going to cost you money," Marcus said quietly, as the car was being pulled out. "The garage door alone is $4,000. Not to mention the structural damage, that beam might need reinforcement." "That's what insurance is for," Karen said, actually waving her hand as if to dismiss the concern. "My insurance will cover it. Don't worry about it." "Your insurance should cover your damage," Marcus said. "Not my repairs." Karen turned to look at him, and even though he couldn't see her eyes behind the sunglasses, he could feel her assessing him. Judging him. Finding him wanting. "Look," she said, and her voice took on a different tone, patient, the way one might speak to someone who wasn't quite understanding something simple. "I'm sure we can work this out. My insurance company handles these things all the time. They're very good at what they do. You'll get your repair estimate, you'll submit it, and it'll all be taken care of." She handed him a business card. Karen Mitchell, it read, with her name underlined in gold lettering. Below it, Life Coach Wellness Facilitator Executive Advisor. Marcus looked at the card, then back at the garage, where his summer storage and his daughter's cello and the boxes of books from his mother's estate were now covered in dust and debris. "I need to make some calls," he said. "You do that," Karen said. She pulled her sunglasses off and rubbed her eyes, and for a moment, Marcus saw something different in her face, not remorse, but exhaustion. "I've been having the worst week. My daughter's been struggling with her identity, my ex-husband forgot my birthday, and now this. It's just one thing after another." Marcus said nothing. "Well, anyway," Karen said, pulling her sunglasses back on and moving toward her position on the driveway where a backup car had just pulled up, driven by her daughter, presumably. "I'm sure this will all be fine. These things happen. I'll let my insurance handle it." She drove away in the backup car, a cream-colored SUV that seemed to shimmer in the returning sunlight. Marcus stood in his garage and called his insurance agent. He called the contractor who'd installed the door. He called his ex-wife and explained what had happened, listening to her intake of breath and her carefully neutral response. By noon, he had 3 estimates sitting in his inbox, and a growing sense of dread in his stomach. The estimates ranged from $6,000 to $9,000. The garage door alone was $4,000. The rest was labor, structural reinforcement, painting, testing. He called Karen's insurance company. "Ms. Mitchell has the minimum liability coverage," the representative told him. $5,000 per incident. "That's the limit of what we can cover." Marcus closed his eyes. "She drove through my garage door. There's structural damage. The estimates are already $6,000 to $9,000. "I understand, sir," the representative said, in the tone of someone who did understand, which made it somehow worse. "However, the policy limit is $5,000. We'll cover up to that amount. For anything beyond that, you'd need to file a claim with your homeowner's insurance, and it would likely fall under your deductible, depending on your coverage." "This is insane," Marcus said. "Yes, sir," the representative agreed. "Unfortunately, it's not uncommon. By evening, Marcus's insurance agent had informed him that his homeowner's policy had a $5,000 deductible. Between Karen's maximum coverage and his own deductible, he was looking at paying the difference himself. He sat in his kitchen, the same spot where he'd been drinking his third cup of coffee that morning, and did the math. He was responsible for at least $2,000, possibly more. $2,000 for someone else's negligence. $2,000 for someone else's carelessness. He called Karen. "Hi, this is Karen," her voicemail said, in a bright, breathy tone. "You've reached me. Leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Namaste." Marcus hung up without leaving a message. He called again the next morning. "Hi, Marcus." Karen answered, her voice bright and genuinely surprised to hear from him. "I was going to call you. The insurance company said they'd take care of everything." "They're not taking care of everything," Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "They're covering $5,000. The damage is between $6,000 and $9,000. I'm responsible for the rest." There was a pause. He could hear the sound of ice cubes clinking in a glass. "Well, that's not my problem," Karen said finally. "That's what insurance is for. You should have better insurance." The phone went quiet. For a moment, Marcus thought she'd hung up. "Karen," he said. "I'm here," she said. "Look, I understand you're upset. But accidents happen. If you can't afford to repair your garage, maybe you should look into a payment plan or something. That's not really my responsibility." "You crashed your car into my house," Marcus said, and he could hear the tremor in his voice now, the anger starting to claw its way up his throat. "And my insurance is handling it," Karen said. "To the limit of my coverage, which is the law. Beyond that, it's your responsibility to have adequate insurance." "You were negligent," Marcus said. "You weren't paying attention. You crashed through my garage door." "I was distracted, yes," Karen said. "But I didn't break any laws. I was coming around the corner, and I missed my turn. It was an accident. These things happen." "Not like this," Marcus said. "Not usually like this." "Well, this time it did," Karen said, and he could hear the beginning of irritation creeping into her voice. "And now you need to deal with it like an adult. I've done everything I'm legally required to do. My insurance is covering the maximum amount. If that's not enough for you, that's a personal finance problem, not an insurance problem." She hung up. Marcus sat in his kitchen, phone in hand, and felt something harden inside him. Something cold and sharp and angry. He'd been reasonable. He'd called the police, filed the report, called the insurance companies, gotten the estimates. He'd done everything right. And he was still short $2,000. He looked out the window at his garage. The door was boarded up now, the interior still full of debris that he'd need to clean up himself. The contractor wouldn't start until the insurance settlement cleared, which could take weeks. He pulled out his laptop and did something he'd never done before. He opened Google and typed, "Small Claims Court." The court date was set for 6 weeks later. 6 weeks of waiting, of calling contractors who asked about the insurance settlement before they'd commit to dates, of watching the boarded-up garage every time he pulled into the driveway. 6 weeks of the constant, gnawing awareness that he was $2,000 short and there was no immediate way to get it. His daughter, Sophie, noticed when she came to stay for her summer break. She was 14, old enough to understand that something was wrong but young enough to still ask directly about it. "What happened to the garage?" she asked, standing on the driveway with her suitcase still in her hand. "Someone had an accident," Marcus said, taking her suitcase and heading inside. "I'll explain later." But later came, and the explanation was complicated. It involved insurance and deductibles and negligence and a woman named Karen who apparently didn't believe she was responsible for any of it. Sophie listened with the particular intensity that teenagers have when they're trying to understand injustice. "So you're suing her?" Sophie asked. "To small claims court," Yes, Marcus said. I'm trying to recover the deductible. And she thinks it's not her fault. She thinks it's my fault for having bad insurance and parking my mailbox where she could hit it, Marcus said. Sophie's expression shifted. For a moment, she looked genuinely angry on his behalf, and that did something strange to Marcus's chest. It reminded him why he was doing this, not for the money, not entirely. But because it mattered. Because there was a difference between an accident and negligence, and that difference should matter. The weeks passed with the peculiar slowness that waiting seems to have. The contractor gave him an estimated timeline of 3 weeks after the insurance cleared. The insurance company dragged out the assessment process. Karen's insurance company sent a letter saying they were prepared to offer their maximum coverage but needed his authorization to release the funds. 2 weeks before the court date, Marcus got a phone call from an unfamiliar number. Mr. Webb. A woman's voice, professional and clipped. This is Margaret Chen. I'm an attorney representing Karen Mitchell in the matter of. I'm not settling, Marcus said immediately. There was a pause. I haven't made you an offer yet, Mr. Webb. I don't care, Marcus said. The answer is no. Perhaps you'd like to hear what my client is prepared to offer before you refuse it, Ms. Chen suggested. Her tone hadn't changed, which somehow made Marcus feel worse. Like his anger was something she saw all the time and had learned not to take personally. Fine, he said. What? My client is prepared to offer you $2,500 above and beyond her insurance settlement. This would bring the total settlement to $7,500, which exceeds the lowest of your 3 estimates. In exchange, you would agree to dismiss the small claims suit and sign a non-disclosure agreement agreeing not to discuss the incident publicly or on social media. Marcus felt his jaw clench. She wants to buy my silence. She wants to resolve this matter without going to court, Ms. Chen said carefully. Which is generally in everyone's interest. Court is expensive and time-consuming, Mr. Webb. This offer would compensate you for your losses and allow both parties to move on. She caused $1,800 of damage that she won't take responsibility for, Marcus said. And now she wants me to sign an NDA so I don't tell anyone about it. The NDA is standard in these situations, Ms. Chen said. It protects both parties. It protects her from looking bad, Marcus said. Which is exactly why I'm not signing it. He hung up. He called back 30 seconds later, because he realized he wanted to know something. How did Karen's insurance company get my number? I didn't give it to anyone but, he stopped. Ms. Mitchell gave your contact information to her insurance company, Ms. Chen said, sounding almost apologetic. It's on the incident report. And I'm very sorry, Mr. Webb, but my client did ask me to convey that she's willing to increase that offer to $3,000 if you'll sign the agreement. $3,000. It would cover the gap entirely. It would resolve the problem. All he had to do was agree to never discuss what had happened. Tell her no, Marcus said. Are you certain? Ms. Chen asked. This is a generous offer. I'm certain, Marcus said. He hung up and sat in his kitchen, waiting for the feeling of righteousness he expected to have. It didn't come. Instead, he felt tired. Deeply, bone-wearily tired. Sophie found him there an hour later, still staring at his cold coffee. Did something happen? She asked. Karen's lawyer offered me money to drop the suit and sign an NDA, Marcus said. That's bribing you, Sophie said immediately. It's called settling, Marcus said. It's legal. It's still making you shut up so nobody knows what she did, Sophie said. She sat down at the kitchen table across from him. Are you going to take it? Marcus looked at his daughter. She had his ex-wife's dark hair and his stubbornness, a combination that had always meant trouble. No, he said. I'm not. Good, Sophie said firmly. Because it's not right. The court date arrived on a Thursday morning. Marcus dressed carefully, dress pants, a button-down shirt, nothing that would make him look angry or vindictive. His lawyer, who he'd hired for $300 through a legal services website, met him outside the courthouse 15 minutes early. The key is to stay calm, his lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 60s named Robert DeMarco, advised. Judge Hastings doesn't like theatrics. Just state the facts, show your documentation, and let the evidence speak for itself. Karen showed up in a cream-colored power suit and oversized sunglasses, which she removed as soon as she entered the courtroom. She brought Margaret Chen with her, who was impeccably dressed in a way that made Marcus's $300 lawyer look like he'd grabbed his suit from the back of a closet. Karen looked composed, even sympathetic. She looked like someone who was about to be misunderstood by the legal system, not someone who'd driven through someone else's garage. The judge, a woman in her 70s with steel gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, did not look sympathetic to anyone. Mr. Webb, Judge Hastings said, you're suing Ms. Mitchell for damages in the amount of $2,300. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Marcus said. Specifically, that's the amount not covered by the insurance settlement. And you're claiming that Ms. Mitchell was negligent in causing the accident? Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Mitchell? Judge Hastings turned to Karen, who'd stood up and was now looking at the judge with an expression of carefully composed regret. Your Honor, I don't deny that I was at fault for the accident itself, Karen said. I wasn't paying attention, and I made a mistake. I'm genuinely sorry about that. However, I believe that the insurance system is designed to handle these situations, and I've paid out my full policy limit. Beyond that, I've done everything I'm legally required to do. Judge Hastings looked over her glasses at Karen. You're aware that you're liable for damages caused by your negligence, regardless of your insurance coverage. I am, Karen said, and the tone of her voice had shifted slightly. Quieter, more vulnerable. But I'm also dealing with some serious personal issues right now, and I simply can't afford to pay additional damages. Marcus's lawyer leaned over and whispered, not relevant. I'm prepared to hear your evidence, Mr. Webb, the judge said, turning back to him. Robert DeMarco stood and presented the 3 estimates Marcus had received, the police report, and the incident photos. He presented the insurance settlement letter. He presented a simple timeline. Karen's negligence had caused direct, quantifiable damage, and the insurance settlement didn't cover the full amount of that damage. Karen's lawyer, Margaret Chen, argued that the insurance settlement was the standard remedy for vehicular damage, that Karen had complied with all legal requirements, and that asking for additional payment amounted to double recovery. Your client had an opportunity to purchase adequate insurance, Judge Hastings said, looking at Margaret Chen. That she chose not to is not Mr. Webb's problem. The judge looked at Karen. You were negligent, Ms. Mitchell. You caused damage to Mr. Webb's property. Your insurance covers $5,000. Mr. Webb has 3 estimates ranging from $6,000 to $9,000. You are liable for the difference between what your insurance covers and the reasonable cost of repairs. The lowest estimate is $6,000. The settled insurance amount is $5,000. Therefore, you are liable for $1,000. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not victory, exactly. But validation. Recognition that what had happened mattered. That his garage door mattered. That his time and his inconvenience and his damage mattered. Additionally, Judge Hastings continued, looking directly at Karen, I want to note for the record that attempting to settle a suit with a non-disclosure agreement that prevents discussion of the incident is not something I view favorably. If Mr. Webb chooses to discuss this incident publicly, he has every right to do so. The gavel came down. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $1,000, payable within 30 days. Karen's face had gone pale. Margaret Chen was immediately leaning over, whispering something to her, her expression professionally neutral. Karen looked like she wanted to argue, and then something in her face shifted, a recognition that this was over, that she'd lost, that the system had not protected her from responsibility. Marcus wanted to feel happy about it. He really did. Outside the courthouse, Karen was walking quickly toward her car, Margaret Chen matching her stride. Marcus stayed several paces behind, watching. Karen's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, looked at it, and seemed to deflate slightly. That evening, Marcus got a message from an unknown number. It took him a moment to realize it was from Karen. "I'm going to pay it," the message read. "You don't have to worry. I'll send it within the week. I just want this to be over." Marcus didn't respond. 3 days later, a check arrived in his mailbox. It was from Karen's personal account, $1,000, written out to Marcus Webb, with the memo line left blank. He stared at it for a long time, then went to the bank and deposited it. The money sat in his account untouched for another week. Then the contractor called to say he was ready to start the repair work. The repair took 10 days. 10 days of contractors going in and out, of the sound of power drills and the smell of wood dust and fresh paint, of Marcus having to be home to supervise and sign off on various stages of the work. The garage door itself was installed on day 6, a sleek new model that actually had smart home integration. It cost slightly more than the last one because Marcus had upgraded, using some of the settlement money and supplementing with his own funds. When the work was finished, the garage looked better than it had before. New paint, reinforced beam, the floor carefully cleaned and sealed. Marcus took a photo and sent it to Sophie, who was away at a summer STEM camp. "Garage is fixed," he wrote. "That's good," she responded. "Are you glad you sued her?" Marcus sat with the question. Was he glad? The legal victory felt hollow somehow. He'd won, but the winning had come with 7 weeks of stress and the knowledge that there existed people in the world who would crash through your garage and then act like it was your fault. The money had covered the gap, but it hadn't made him feel better. It had just made the problem go away. "I don't know," he wrote back. "Ask me in a few months." A week after the garage was finished, Marcus was coming home from work when he saw Karen pulling out of her daughter's driveway 2 houses down. She saw him at the same time, their eyes meeting for just a moment over the space between their cars. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just pulled out and drove in the opposite direction. Marcus felt something complex move through his chest. Not satisfaction. Not even vindication. Just a strange, aching emptiness. Life returned to something like normal. The garage was functional. His homeowner's insurance had gone up by 8%, a permanent reminder of the incident. The contractor had sent a nice review request, which Marcus had filled out, 5 stars, professional and efficient, and then had marked as spam. It was in late September, almost 4 months after the accident, that Marcus ran into Karen at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, examining tomatoes with the focus of someone who was using that focus to avoid thinking about anything else. Marcus almost turned around and left. But he'd already made eye contact, and something in him, some stubborn, tired part, didn't want to slink away like a coward. He walked up to the tomato display. Karen looked up, recognized him, and her entire body seemed to tense. "Mr. Webb," she said. It wasn't warm. It was the tone of someone acknowledging an uncomfortable necessity. "Karen," he said. They stood there for a moment, the space between them filled with their complicated shared history. "I paid you," Karen said finally. "The $1,000. "I know," Marcus said. "I got the check." "And you cashed it," Karen said, and there was something almost accusatory in her tone, like she couldn't quite understand how he'd gone from suing her to accepting her money. "I did," Marcus said. "I needed it to finish the repairs." Karen set the tomato back down and turned to face him fully. She looked older than she had that morning in the garage. Tired. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, or maybe they had and Marcus just hadn't noticed. "I've thought about what happened a lot," Karen said quietly. "And I want you to know that I don't think it was entirely my fault." Marcus felt something sharp and cold move through his stomach. "What do you mean, not entirely?" "I mean that these things are often more complicated than they appear," Karen said. "I was having a difficult day. I was distracted. Yes, I made a mistake. But if your mailbox hadn't been so close to the street. It wasn't close to the street, Marcus said, and his voice was very quiet. It was exactly where it should have been. You say that, Karen said, but I'm not convinced you're being entirely fair. You seem like a reasonable person, Mr. Webb. Surely you can understand that accidents happen. They do, Marcus said. And when they do, the person who causes them is responsible. That's not complicated. That's just how responsibility works. I paid you, Karen said again, and now there was an edge to her voice. I lost that lawsuit. I paid you $1,000. What more do you want from me? I wanted you to understand that you caused the problem, Marcus said. Not my mailbox. Not my bad insurance. You did. You drove through my garage door, and you needed to accept responsibility for that without trying to find ways to blame it on me. Karen picked up a tomato and put it in her basket. Her hands were shaking slightly. Well, I've accepted it, she said. I paid. We're done. Are we? Marcus asked. I don't know what you want, Karen said. She wasn't looking at him anymore. I truly don't. I made a mistake, I paid for it, and you still seem angry. I'm not angry, Marcus said, and realized it was true. He wasn't angry anymore. He was something else, something harder to define. I'm just aware of what happened. What happened is that I crashed into your garage, Karen said. And I paid for it. I don't know what else you want me to do. I'm not a perfect person, Mr. Webb. I make mistakes. I'm doing the best I can. She took her basket and walked away before Marcus could respond. He stood in the produce section, surrounded by perfectly arranged fruits and vegetables, and felt the weight of the interaction settle over him. She was right. He'd won the lawsuit. She'd paid. By every legal and financial measure, the matter was resolved. But it wasn't resolved for him. It would never be entirely resolved. That night, Marcus did something he'd been avoiding for months. He looked up Karen Mitchell online. Her website was glossy and professional. Karen Mitchell, life coach and wellness facilitator. There were testimonials from people whose lives she'd supposedly changed. There were photos of her leading workshops, speaking at events, smiling at the camera with the kind of certainty that suggested she never crashed her car through anyone's house. He found an article she'd written for a wellness blog, Overcoming Victim Mentality, Taking Responsibility for Your Life. It was about how blaming others for our circumstances was a form of powerlessness, how we needed to own our choices and our outcomes. How making excuses was the death of personal growth. Marcus read the entire thing, his chest growing tighter with each paragraph. It was well written. It was thoughtful. It was absolutely, completely hypocritical coming from someone who had crashed through his garage and blamed him for it. He didn't leave a comment. He didn't share it on social media. He just closed the laptop and sat in his kitchen, feeling deeply, profoundly tired. The next day, he got a call from his daughter's therapist. Not his therapist, Sophie's. The woman he and Emma had agreed to enroll her in after the divorce, when Sophie had started having trouble adjusting to the split household. I wanted to check in with you about something Sophie mentioned, Dr. Reeves said, her tone carefully neutral. She's been talking about a situation that happened at your house involving a car accident and a lawsuit. She seems to feel quite strongly about fairness and accountability. Marcus's hands tightened on his phone. She does. Yes. That's good, Dr. Reeves said. Having a strong moral compass is important. But I wanted to gently suggest that she may be absorbing some of the emotional aftermath from this situation. She's talked about it in our sessions several times. It seems to matter to her that you stood up for yourself. Is that a problem? Marcus asked. Not necessarily, Dr. Reeves said. But I would encourage you to be mindful of how much of this you're sharing with her. Children often internalize their parents' conflicts and disappointments. She sounds proud of you, Mr. Webb. But she also sounds like she's carrying some of your anger. After the call ended, Marcus sat with this information. His anger had migrated to his daughter. His refusal to let it go had somehow become her fight too. He picked up his phone and called Emma. "Hi," she said, surprised. They didn't call each other for non-essential reasons anymore. "Is everything okay?" "I want to tell you something," Marcus said. "About the Karen situation." He explained it all, not asking for permission, just informing her. What had happened, the lawsuit, the money, the encounter at the grocery store. Everything. When he finished, Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Sophie's mentioned it," Emma said finally. "But not in great detail. She mostly talked about how you stood up for yourself, which I think was good. You should stand up for yourself." "But," Marcus said, hearing the unspoken qualification in her tone. "But I wonder if it's over," Emma said. "For you, I mean. It sounds like it isn't quite over." Marcus looked out the kitchen window at his garage. The new door. The fresh paint. Everything repaired and restored. "I don't know how to make it over," he said quietly. "Maybe you can't," Emma said. "Maybe some things just stay complicated." Part 4, The Unraveling. The encounter with Karen had shifted something in Marcus that he couldn't quite put back into place. He found himself checking her social media periodically, reading her blog posts, looking for evidence of, what? Guilt? Some sign that she actually understood what she'd done. Instead, he found a post about the importance of moving past resentment, written about 3 weeks after their encounter at the grocery store. It didn't mention him specifically, but the timing was too close to be coincidental. In the post, Karen wrote about how holding on to anger was a form of self-sabotage, how people who couldn't move forward after conflicts were essentially choosing their own suffering. Marcus read it 3 times. By the second reading, he realized something uncomfortable: she wasn't entirely wrong. He had chosen to read about her online. He had chosen to check her social media regularly. He had chosen to carry this forward into his daily life. She had paid the settlement. The court had ruled. The garage was fixed. And he was choosing to stay angry about it anyway. But then the third reading arrived, and he noticed something else. Karen had written about how misunderstandings often happened when people didn't communicate clearly, how assumptions about intent were usually wrong. She wrote about the importance of compassion, even for people who had hurt us, because they're usually just doing the best they can with the tools they have. And Marcus felt something flip inside him. She wasn't talking about understanding that she'd been wrong. She was talking about understanding that other people weren't always trying to hurt you. As if the guilt belonged to him, for not being compassionate enough to understand her difficult week. For not being emotionally mature enough to just accept that accidents happened. He closed the browser and called Robert DeMarco, his lawyer. "I need to know something," Marcus said. "Is there any legal way she could challenge the judgment? Any way this could come back?" "No," DeMarco said immediately. "The judgment is final. Small claims court appeals are difficult. She'd have to show significant legal error, and Judge Hastings was very clear in her reasoning." "Why? Is she trying to contact you?" "No," Marcus said. "I'm just being thorough." After he hung up, he opened a document on his computer and started writing. Not to Karen. Not to post on social media. Just to write. He wrote down every detail of what had happened, the sound of the crash, the way Karen had smiled when she came out of the car, the conversations with the insurance company, the lawyer who'd offered him money to be quiet. He wrote about the lawsuit and the judgment and the hollow feeling of winning. He wrote about the grocery store encounter and the implication that he was wrong for still being upset about something that was, technically, resolved. He wrote about Karen's blog post and the slow realization that she had never, would never, acknowledge that she'd been wrong in any meaningful way. That the entire event had been, in her mind, a learning opportunity about the importance of compassion, his compassion for her, specifically. It took him 2 hours to write it all down. When he finished, he saved it to a file called What Actually Happened, and closed the laptop. The next morning, Sophie came home from her STEM camp. She was 15 now, angular and serious, with a new determination in the way she moved through the world. She'd made friends at camp, she reported, other girls who wanted to study engineering and physics. She'd built something called a hydroponic garden system and had won a small innovation award. Marcus was proud of her. He was also acutely aware that somewhere in her moral framework, the Karen situation had been filed as a case study in standing up against injustice. He didn't want her to carry that lesson forward in the way that he was carrying it forward. "Your therapist called," he said, as Sophie unpacked her bags. "Dr. Reeves. She mentioned that you've been thinking about the car accident situation." Sophie paused. "Yeah," she said. "Is that bad?" "No," Marcus said. "But I want to tell you something. And I want you to really hear it, because I think it's important." He sat down on the edge of her bed and told her everything. Not the details, she'd heard some of those already. But he told her about his ongoing anger, about checking Karen's social media, about the way the situation had followed him around for months even though it was legally resolved. "I won," he said. "By every measure, I won. But I didn't feel like I won. And I think that's because I was waiting for something that was never going to come." "What?" Sophie asked. "Recognition," Marcus said. An actual admission that she'd been wrong. An actual understanding on her part that what she did had consequences and that it was her responsibility. "But she's not capable of that, Sophie. Or maybe she's not willing. Either way, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I spent months of my life waiting for her to be someone she's not." Sophie listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. "So what are you going to do?" she asked finally. "I'm going to stop checking her social media," Marcus said. "I'm going to stop being angry. I'm going to remember that I have control over how much of my emotional energy I give to this situation. And I'm going to be present with the people I love instead of stuck in this thing that's already over." "That sounds hard," Sophie said. "It is," Marcus said. "But I think it's necessary." He meant it. It took him another week to follow through on it, but he did. He unfollowed Karen on social media. He stopped checking her blog. He didn't look up her name online. When thoughts about the situation came up, and they did, frequently, especially in quiet moments, he acknowledged them and then let them pass. It worked, mostly. The anger didn't vanish completely, but it became something smaller and more manageable. Something he could carry without it carrying him. Then, 6 weeks later, something happened that he could never have anticipated. Emma called him at work. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, and her tone was strange. Cautious. "What?" Marcus said immediately. Something in his stomach had clenched. "Sophie did something," Emma said. "And I need to tell you about it before you find out some other way." Marcus's heart rate accelerated. "Is she okay?" "Yes," Emma said. "She's fine. She's actually, she's being quite impressive about this whole thing. But she wrote something." "What did she write?" "An article," Emma said. "About the car accident. About Karen. About responsibility and accountability and how adults don't usually want to accept those things. And she submitted it to a youth activism blog, and they published it." Marcus felt something cold move through his chest. "No," he said. "Tell me she didn't." "It's very well written," Emma said. "And it's a legitimate critique of Karen's behavior. But it's also very specific, and I think you should probably read it before." "Before what?" Marcus said. The article was titled, "When Accountability Becomes Optional, A Teenager's Perspective on Adult Responsibility." It didn't name Karen directly, but anyone who lived in the area and had any connection to what had happened would immediately know who it was about. Sophie had written about the accident in clinical, careful terms. She'd written about the lawsuit, the judgment, the insurance settlement. But more importantly, she'd written about Karen's response, about how Karen had tried to blame a mailbox, how Karen's insurance company had offered money to keep quiet, how Karen had encountered their father months later and still refused to actually acknowledge her mistake. And then Sophie had done something that Marcus found simultaneously brilliant and devastating. She'd included excerpts from Karen's own blog posts about responsibility and accountability and moving past victim mentality. She'd quoted them directly, creating a clear narrative dissonance between what Karen preached and what Karen practiced. The article ended with a simple statement: adults teach us what matters by the way they behave, not by what they tell us to believe. When adults don't accept responsibility for their mistakes, they tell us that accountability is optional. When adults ask for compassion while refusing to offer it, they tell us that compassion is a one-way street. When adults want to move past their mistakes without acknowledging them, they tell us that the truth doesn't matter as much as being comfortable. Those are the lessons my father had to unlearn after someone crashed through his garage and then spent months trying to make him feel like it was his fault. Marcus read it twice and then called Sophie. "You cannot publish this," he said immediately, and then realized she'd already published it. "Why did you publish this?" "Because it's true," Sophie said, and she sounded much older than 15. "And because I wanted people to know." "Sophie." "Dad," she interrupted. "I know you wanted to drop this. I know you wanted to move on. And I respect that. But I watched you carry this around for months. And I watched Karen just walk around like nothing happened, like she'd done nothing wrong. And nobody called her on it. You did, in court, and then you just let it go. Because the court case was over," Marcus said. "Because that's how the system works." "The legal system," Sophie said. "Not the actual system. Not the system where people are supposed to understand the consequences of their actions." Marcus sat down in his work chair. "Have you thought about what happens when Karen reads this?" "Yes," Sophie said. "And I'm prepared for that." "Are you?" Marcus said, more sharply than he intended. "Because I'm not sure you are, Sophie. Karen's going to be angry. She might try to threaten legal action. She might. She might try to sue me." Sophie asked. "For telling the truth about her behavior?" "Defamation," Marcus said. "Libel. These are things that exist, and they're complicated when you're talking about reputation." "But I didn't lie," Sophie said, and she sounded absolutely certain. "Everything I wrote is true." She was right. Marcus had checked. He'd read through the article 3 times, looking for any statement that could be considered an untruth or an unfair characterization. There wasn't any. Sophie had been scrupulously careful with the facts while being devastating about their implication. "I need to call a lawyer," he said finally. Sophie was quiet. "Are you mad at me?" Marcus looked out the window at his perfectly repaired garage. He thought about the 6 weeks he'd spent in the system, the settlement that was too low, the NDA offer he'd refused. He thought about the grocery store encounter and Karen's blog post about moving past victim mentality. "No," he said. "I'm not mad at you. But I'm scared. And I need to talk to a lawyer about what comes next." The lawyer Marcus called was not Robert DeMarco, who handled small claims court. This was a different kind of legal matter. This lawyer, a woman named Patricia Valdez who specialized in internet content and libel, listened to the situation and then told him something that was both reassuring and terrifying. "Your daughter is protected by substantial truth," Patricia said. "Everything she wrote is factually accurate. And more importantly, it's her opinion and her experience. Karen Mitchell is a public figure of sorts, she's a life coach with a public platform. That gives her significantly less protection against commentary about her public behavior. So Karen can't sue her?" Marcus asked. "She can try," Patricia said. And trying would be publicly humiliating for her, because she'd have to convince a judge that accurate statements about her factually verifiable behavior constitute defamation. Which is difficult when the defendant is a teenager who wrote about a real incident that had a real lawsuit attached to it. But the financial exposure is minimal for your daughter, Patricia said. Though Karen's lawyer might not know that. There may be a letter. There might be threats. But I would advise you not to be intimidated by them. If Karen files suit, we'll fight it aggressively. Marcus paid Patricia's consultation fee and called Emma. She's created a legal liability situation, he said. And possibly a bigger problem than we realize. Have you read the comments? Emma asked. He hadn't. He pulled the article back up and scrolled to the bottom of the page. There were 347 comments. Most of them were supportive of Sophie. There were people who'd had similar experiences with Karen, other clients, other people in the community. There was someone who said they'd worked with Karen as a life coach and had paid for services that never materialized. Someone else mentioned that Karen had a pattern of blaming other people for her mistakes, that it had affected her relationship with her daughter. But there were also defensive comments. People saying that accidents happened. People saying that Sophie was being unfair. People saying that Karen deserved compassion too. And there was a comment from Karen. Marcus's stomach clenched as he read it. I'm disappointed that someone so young has learned to be cruel, Karen had written. I made a mistake. I've acknowledged that mistake, and I've paid for it. What this article does is take a moment of human error and tries to shame me indefinitely. I was having a very difficult time when this accident happened. I was going through a separation, dealing with my daughter's mental health crisis, and managing 2 business restructures. None of that excuses what I did, but it adds context. This article, written by a teenager who doesn't understand how complicated adult life is, attempts to deny me any growth or redemption. It attempts to make me a cautionary tale instead of a person. I hope she learns, as she grows older, that compassion and forgiveness are more powerful than judgment. The comment had already been liked 239 times. Marcus read it 3 times. It was, he had to admit, well written. It took responsibility while simultaneously explaining why she couldn't really be held responsible. It positioned her as the victim of a teenager's cruelty. It positioned Sophie as someone incapable of understanding adult complexity. And it was infuriating. Marcus called Sophie back. Have you read Karen's comment? He asked. Yeah, Sophie said, and she sounded smaller now. Less certain. Is she right? Am I being cruel? No, Marcus said firmly. But she's very good at making that argument sound true. He read Patricia's advice back to her. He told her about the legal protections. He also told her something else. I'm proud of you for telling the truth, he said. I'm scared of what comes next. I'm worried that Karen's going to use her considerable skills to make you feel like you did something wrong. But you didn't. You told the truth about something that happened. But now she's saying that asking her to be accountable is being cruel to her, Sophie said. And a lot of people seem to agree with her. A lot of people think lots of things, Marcus said. But accountability isn't cruelty. It's just, accountability. The letter from Karen's lawyer arrived 3 days later. Marcus and Emma sat at Emma's kitchen table and opened it together. Patricia had told them it was probably just a cease and desist, a scare tactic. But reading it still made Marcus's heart race. Karen was not suing. The letter explained that Karen was deeply concerned about defamatory statements and requested that the article be removed from the website. It stated that Karen was a private individual who had been unfairly portrayed, and that the article's implications of moral failings constituted actionable defamation. It did not mention the legal reality that Patricia had laid out, that every statement in the article was factually true, that Karen was arguably a public figure due to her wellness business, that criticizing her behavior was protected speech. It was an intimidation letter dressed up as a legal threat. How does she keep doing this? Emma asked, staring at the letter in disbelief. How does she keep taking the thing she did wrong and turning it into a situation where she's the victim? It's a skill, Marcus said quietly. Or a talent. Or maybe just the accumulated privilege of someone who's never had to actually sit with the consequences of their actions. He called Patricia. This is standard, Patricia said, unsurprised. Do not respond. Do not remove the article. If she files suit, which I doubt she will because she'd lose, we'll fight it. For now, just don't engage. But Sophie was engaging. The comments on her article had grown to over 900 by that point, and she was responding to them, answering questions, providing more context. She was also, Marcus could tell, starting to doubt herself. He invited her to come stay with him for a week. I think you need to take a break from the comments, he said. Let this settle for a bit. Sophie agreed, and she arrived on a Friday afternoon with a backpack and a laptop she'd been carefully avoiding opening. They spent the weekend mostly in silence, doing ordinary things. Marcus made pasta. They watched a movie. Sophie helped him organize the garage, now that it was finished, finding homes for storage boxes and his summer tools. On Sunday afternoon, they sat on the couch in the living room, and Marcus told her the full story of how he'd felt in the months after the lawsuit was over. I kept thinking about her, he said. And I kept being angry. And I kept hoping that eventually, the anger would mean something. That it would change her, or make her understand, or make the situation feel different. But it didn't. It just sat there. So I should not care about this? Sophie asked. I should just let it go. No, Marcus said. I think you did something good. I think telling the truth matters. But I also think you need to understand something about people like Karen. They're not going to change because you point out that they're wrong. They're not going to suddenly realize their responsibility and feel remorseful. That's not how they work. So what's the point? Sophie asked, and she sounded genuinely confused. If telling the truth doesn't change anything, what's the point? The point, Marcus said carefully, is that the truth gets told. The point is that other people who've had similar experiences see your article and feel less alone. The point is that maybe, someday, someone will read what you wrote and realize they're doing what Karen did, and they'll change. Not because of you, but because they'll recognize themselves in your words. And Karen herself? She'll never change. Probably not, Marcus said. Unless she decides she wants to. And that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is just to tell the truth and then live your life. Sophie absorbed this. I don't want to be angry all the time, she said quietly. Like you were. I know, Marcus said. So don't be. Tell the truth, and then let it go. But letting it go proved more difficult than Marcus had anticipated, because Karen did something unexpected. She didn't file a lawsuit. Instead, she published a blog post. The post was titled, in response to recent accusations, The Power of Understanding Complexity. And it was, Marcus had to grudgingly admit, a masterpiece of narrative manipulation. Karen acknowledged that the accident had happened. She acknowledged that she'd been at fault. She acknowledged that the other family had gone through an inconvenience, and she was genuinely sorry for that. But then she went on to detail her separation, her daughter's struggles with identity, her business difficulties, and her discovery that therapy had helped her understand that I tend to take on too much responsibility for things that are out of my control, while simultaneously being defensive about things that truly are my fault. She talked about her young accuser with what seemed like genuine sympathy, noting that teenagers often struggled with black and white thinking, and that she hoped Sophie would eventually grow into understanding the gray areas that made the world so much more complex than internet discourse suggested. And then she announced that she was starting a scholarship fund for young people interested in conflict resolution and restorative justice, because she believed that punitive approaches to accountability ultimately harm everyone, and we need to find better ways forward. The blog post got shared thousands of times. People praised Karen for her humility and her growth. Someone created a GoFundMe for her scholarship fund, which raised $50,000 in the first week. Sophie read the blog post and cried. She took everything, Sophie said, her voice shaking. She took the whole thing and she made it into something about how she's evolved, about how she's learned. She made herself the hero of the story. Marcus felt cold fury move through his chest, but he kept his voice steady. Yes, he said. She did. And it's working, Sophie said. Everyone's praising her. And now when people read my article, they read it as the unfair attack of a teenager on someone who was actually trying to do better. She flipped it. She did, Marcus said. And it's brilliant in the most terrible way. He thought about calling Patricia. He thought about asking if there was any legal recourse. He thought about posting his own response, or encouraging Sophie to post one. Instead, he sat with his daughter while she cried, and he let her feel the weight of the realization that the truth was sometimes not enough. That people could acknowledge the truth while fundamentally distorting its meaning. That the internet was a place where narrative sometimes mattered more than fact. And he thought about something Emma had said months ago, maybe some things just stay complicated.